Hey, it's Derek Depker, Bestseller Secrets here with Caryl Westmore. And today we're going to be talking about how to overcome the blocks that we experience as writers and authors. That could be writer's block. There can also be a lot of blocks around fear. And, I've gone through this myself. I know many authors have experienced these blocks because it's so much of an inner game when it comes to, I don't feel like I'm a good marketer. I fear around reaching out to people, asking for reviews. What are people going to think of my book, right? There's so many of these inner challenges that we face. And I remember actually, as Tony Robbins, I heard this secondhand, was talking about writing a book. And this is Tony Robbins, and he mentioned something about how challenging it is to write a book. So as an author, you are it's one of the greatest personal development endeavors you can go on is writing a book and getting it out there. And Caryl has written multiple books. She's a prolific author. She's also the world's first tapping book coach. We're going to hear a little bit more about tapping, EFT tapping. You might be familiar with that. But what Caryl does, it goes beyond EFT tapping. We're going to be talking about maybe touching a little bit on NLP, hypnosis, re-imprinting your beliefs, and how this affects you as an author. And so Caryl says, superpowers to help writers and creatives find and release inner blocks and beliefs, hijacking their inspiration, productivity, and happiness. So with that, welcome, Caryl. How's it going?
Hi, Derek. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so before we get in to the releasing the blocks, I want to touch upon that. Can you share briefly a little bit about your backstory and how you got to be doing the work that you're doing right now?
Okay, well, I was born to be a writer, writing from little journals and things when I was a child. And I was born in Zimbabwe and grew up there. And then I went to university and studied English and realized that I was not an academic and I wanted to be a journalist. And I applied for the newspapers, became a journalist for many years, women's editor. I got a camera, a photojournalist. And really writing was my passion. But underneath, I was a spiritual seeker, and I was always reading the books like from the time of Dale Carnegie through to, Louise Hay. And I was always interested because I came from a difficult childhood, which is why I wanted to break free. And I call myself a break free coach, but talk therapy didn't do it for me. So all the years I was a journalist writing about inspirational topics and women's issues, I myself was married in a marriage where I was stuck, and I'd seen my mother stuck in her marriage. And then what happened was I had a fire and everything changed, and I switched completely through the trauma of losing my dog and being broke and homeless. I switched to basically asking, give me a reason for living or let me die. And I don't say I switched, but I switched careers as a result of questioning why, what was my life about if there was no reason for me to be, mother and my kids were grown up. And so from being a journalist, I was shown how to use my skills to be a promoter. And I developed a 6-figure business in South Africa promoting books. You see how books always came up in my life. I'd loved authors from afar because we didn't have the American access to authors. But gradually I began to invite people who had a healing story like Brandon Bayes with A Journey, how she healed a tumor the size of a football. And then I worked with Byron Katie, who I see Hal Elroyd recently has been talking about on his podcast. And so I began to really, through the power of intention, I guess, and the law of attraction, I attracted into my life not only authors and with a good story, but processes that dramatically changed my own life and then led me in the direction to be a healer myself, or a therapist and a writer. So I was writing, but I still hadn't written the book inside me. And then the day came when that happened, and my first book was about all the amazing ways that emotional energy psychology tools could help people break free. I wasn't only focused on writers in the early days. I was focused on clearing my blocks to love, which I did, and I've been happily married to the man of my dreams for the last 13 years. I was interested in what were my money blocks and how could I clear them, and then I sought in my clients, and I was being sent clients who had these amazing case studies, which then went into my book. So in 2009, my first book, You Can Break Free Fast EFT Tapping, was combined case studies, my own story, and the methodology, which, by the way, Derek, was very, very new in those days. I was really like a pioneering wacko in the beginning. Today, there's a whole surge of people explaining how the brain works, how neuroscience can explain why tapping works and why we need to go into the buried traumas and how the body holds the traumas. But what was always fascinating was that there were people along the way who longed to write a book, and I could always help them find the triggering trauma in their childhood that had shut them down. And once they broke free, they then went on, like Tanya de Villiers, went on to write 8 books, having almost had a block in her being about being emotional, because when she was 3, it went back to her father saying, Tanya, don't be so emotional. So although her topic, and then she went on to write a book about helping a little boy with cerebral palsy and writing children's books, which were emotional, but it was only when she broke free from this stricture, this belief that you can't be emotional. And then there's another interesting story. I don't know if you want to hear about the writer whose father was a stern judge. And when she was, should I tell that story?
Yeah, we can get into that in a second. I'll emphasize something that you're saying here that's so important, and that is clearing these blocks, or working through the beliefs that we have, the beliefs, the identity, the persona that we carry with us, and how that influences you as a writer, as an author. Because I've worked, like you've worked, with clients, with, myself writing books. And if someone has a belief that I can't be emotional, or a feeling, they might not even be conscious of it, just this feeling of can't be emotional, I can't open up. And a lot of times it's happening on an unconscious level. That is going to block them, obviously, from writing a book, or they start to write a book. And I notice this when going through writing, and it just feels like robotic or cold, or like I can tell they're holding back, and it loses that impact. And so this is one of my fascinations, how I got into NLP hypnosis as well. I think we, us call it like healers or coaches, we do this work because we see that you can give someone the best strategies in the world. Here's a 5-step process to get your book out in 48 hours or whatever. Like, you can give all these little tricks and strategies, but if a person hasn't resolved these deeper blocks that might be holding them back, none of the strategies are going to work. So it's so important that you work on the psychological level, on the deeper level that we're talking about. And so with that, please share the story about this writer.
Yeah, well, I was actually on a radio show talking about EFT tapping because I was so passionate about it once I discovered it, even though people had never heard of it, especially in South Africa in the early 2000s. I knew that it helped people because I saw the results. And I went on a radio show. This is what I'm saying. It was a random. I didn't know this person, but then she told me that she wanted to be a writer, and she'd gone to the country. She sold her business. She'd set it up, but she felt stuck and blocked, and she was wondering if I could help her. So after the radio show, we hopped on the phone, and I talked her through. I did some tapping because tapping reduces the tension in the body. It helps the amygdala calm down. And then the process I do is not say, well, what happened to you when you were a child? Because that's like beating the bushes and asking a little fawn to come out to you. You have to be gentle and non-obtrusive when you're trying to find the root cause of someone's problem, because they've often buried it. In her case, eventually, after tapping and talking and, going back to this memory and that memory, she went back to what I call the break free aha. This was the moment of freeze, of gold trauma, when she was 11 years old. She was running around in the garden, and she sat down, wrote a poem. She loved writing, and she sort of skipped inside to her father, who was a judge, and he was at his desk in his office. And she told him how she longed to be a writer, and she spilled it out, her passion for writing. And he said 3 or 4 words. He said to her, "You can't just be a writer." And then he said, you must have a normal career as well. You can do it on the side. So what she did was she became a chef, and she ran her own catering business. And the day came when she could sell the business. And she had freelance, she used to work as an assistant editor in the evenings, and she had freelance articles to fulfill her. And she went into the country to write her novel, The Cottage in the Country. And she couldn't do anything. She was just being a writer. So you can see how that stricture, that belief, you can't just be a writer, was still playing until we released it. And then, then the flow started again. So that's when I discovered that there's often this, what I call gold traumatic moment, this traumatic moment, or let's say for a writer, when something happened, and even though you might be getting along quite well, you might just reach an impasse. And then you remember a teacher laughing at you when you stood up and said something. And that was another of my clients, where she went with this essay and they scoffed at it. It can be a sibling laughing at you. There's so many, sometimes big traumas and sometimes little t traumas that are so interesting to seek out, and then with EFT tapping, release them, and because you're energetically and emotionally connected to that, we call them an echo, an energy consciousness hologram or child. And once you find, and then you can re-imprint, we have a method of, in the matrix, we call it, in the past, in your energy field, finding the part of you that is stuck or traumatized or given a belief, and then releasing it and then re-imprinting a more positive, empowering belief, not only for that part of you, but then my best part, which I love doing, is to then step into the future with that person and they can see that they've accomplished. All the clients I've been working with recently, the part they enjoyed the most was stepping into the future and saying, I am an author, and seeing themselves with their book already written. And that's a beautiful moment. And it's one thing to just say, affirm it mentally, and it's another thing to go deep and feel it emotionally. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the affirm it can be an intellectual process, right? So there's affirmations. Some of you may be familiar with that. I am a wealthy and prosperous author. I am an inspired author, whatever you want to say. And my take on that is I've certainly seen that happen where people affirm something, but they don't really believe what they're saying. And there's not that congruence. And so if I understand correctly, you're saying this goes now deeper to the emotional level where a person really clears it on the deeper level more than just, saying something to themselves.
Yes. And I think if you watch or listen to the true or the leading lights in the Power of Intention today, after Wayne Dyer, who's passed on, but I'm thinking of Dr. Joe Dispenza, all the people that are leading lights in the field of changing your beliefs are basically saying, and I was also thinking of the alter ego effect, that it's not a mental thing. You have to actually take it on board deep inside and find the part of you that might still be, when it comes to perfectionism and procrastination, I call it the evil sisters. There's a part of you pulling towards doing something and a part of you pulling away where the fear and the negative beliefs are stored. So it's a very interesting way. And, in the beginning, I used to call it inner child work. That's the only name I had for it in those days. But gradually, through the power of neuroscience and through people who, like Dr. The Body Bears the Burden, how our bodies store our traumas, we can actually prove scientifically, if you like, that how it works. And it needs, I feel, Derek, a facilitator sometimes to hold the space for you. You can do it yourself, and there are techniques like Havening, by the way, which I've been teaching people during these difficult times we've been in. But I teach it also to authors who feel stuck, to just, even if you can't remember the part of you or the child in you that was that had a belief that they couldn't do something. If you do this, it's called Havening technique. It's a physical, bodily way of just soothing yourself, along with tapping, if you like. Does that?
Yeah. So, well, I want to touch upon a couple things in the time that we have left. So one thing is we've been talking about tapping and a few of these different techniques. And I want to point out something that there's been more and more research coming out to show the effectiveness of these different techniques, specifically emotional freedom technique. And so if anyone out there is a little bit skeptical, you can look into the research. And I love, double-blind placebo-controlled studies where you can look at it and go, it's more than just, a placebo, but even a placebo is still the power of mind over body. It's still mind work. And yet we can still see the scientifically validated effectiveness of some of these interventions when it comes to treating or supporting a person's mental well-being. So I want to point that out, that if anyone's kind of curious about this, we don't have enough time to go like super in depth in the research, but I'd invite you, anyone interested in this, you can look this up and you can validate it and see a lot of the case studies. There's a reason why emotional freedom technique and these other practices have become so big, and there is the effectiveness behind it, and specifically in these cases for you as an author, as a writer, as someone who wants to get your book out there. So in the time we have left, there's a couple things I'd like to touch upon. The first is what is one of the biggest blocks that you see writers face that, what's a symptom? Maybe is it writer's block? Is it something else that you see is very common that your intervention work can help a person with?
Well, in the people that I'm most interested in working with, who are healers, holistic therapists, and coaches, it's come to me that they have a story to tell and they have case studies to share, but a lot of them don't have a clue about writing a book. And what I've found is that they often have an idea that there is a book inside them, or they've started a book, but they don't know where to go. Obviously, there's so many places that say, I can help you write a book. So when I put it out there, in recent months, those are the people I wanted to help, because they make an impact, and if they could expand their influence, it would be fantastic through their book. So the biggest block, to answer your question, was this hesitancy. One of my clients did have imposter syndrome. She had been dyslexic as a child, but where she was brilliant was tapping with children, and she had a school background. So together, and I don't know, her book isn't out yet, but we could help her find her superpower as a tapping coach for children. And in the time, of this pandemic, and, she could write a book about back to school for coaches, for parents and children. And in helping her, it was not only about being the writer, although I gave her the way to look at her book, but on the day that she was about to go back to take her kids back to school, I said, why don't you talk to some parents, come back to your computer, get onto Zoom and speak to what are parents feeling? How do you feel taking your kid back to school? Get the emotion into it. She said, oh, that's brilliant. It helped her so much. As well as, doing some inner work about the child in her who had been a dyslexic and etc. So does that answer your question? It seems to me that a lot of people have a massive ideas, but they don't know how to focalize them. And I've got this saying, which I've had because I myself, being multi-passionate, have to focus to write a book. I call it like trying to put the toothpaste back into the tube, because we've got the toothpaste everywhere of all our ideas and all the case studies and techniques we know, and then to put it back so that you can communicate that to someone else, I would say, is perhaps the biggest challenge. And that's where you need both the inner tools and the outer techniques of someone like me who's been an indie author from the start. I'm like Joanna Penn. I've just couldn't be bothered. I was too impatient to wait a year for people to publish my books. I wanted to publish them now, and I wanted them to be a coaching tool, to show my expertise and to give to people more than to make money just from the book. I always knew that it was to be a calling card, if you like, to show my expertise. So for me, that's the area that I'm interested in working, and I hope that helps all authors, but particularly those with a message.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. I face it. I think a lot of creatives face it. You and I, many authors, face this challenge of like, it's not a lack of what you can do. At some point you get unleashed, but then it becomes, there's so many ideas and it's like, it's all out there. How do I put it in a book without it being 7,000 pages? Or is it multiple books? Is it one book? Well, which book do I do next? And how do I focus, and which niche? I can help a lot of different people. And so it's definitely a challenge. I still face it. That's probably one of the biggest challenges I face. And I think that's part of just being a creative. And then it's also why having a coach is so important. It's why I have a coach. It's why you work with other coaches and healers, because you can do it yourself, but sometimes you need that outside person to do it with you, right? It's why we work together with other people who can help facilitate the process, right? Like I can do a process in an intervention with someone else, and you can do it to yourself to a degree, and we can touch upon that just briefly. Like, if you want to do some self-guided EFT, at the same time, like you said, having someone that can walk you through it allows you to not be trying to like think about it and do it together. You have a facilitator there who can walk you through that process, who knows how to ask the questions. Let's say though, someone goes, and we haven't really established this, you have a couple processes, EFT, matrix reimprinting, a few things that you can integrate and use with a person. Is there something that you're able to share real quickly here that someone could do, like an EFT process on themselves, or any techniques that someone could take away right from this interview and use it to notice some improvement?
Well, what was coming to me as you were talking is that the nature of trauma, we call it an Uden moment. So if while you're tapping, and I'm not going to go through the tapping, you can find it easy on the internet, the tapping points, but while you're tapping and to slow down, if you're doing it for yourself, all this procrastination, I wonder if there was a time, when I tried to do something and it didn't work out. But what we're looking for, if you keep a journal and maybe some memories come up, the nature of trauma is it's unexpected, Udin, UDIN, unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and you had no resources. So there was a moment when the teacher called you up to the top of the class and said your homework was full of spelling mistakes, even though you'd written a brilliant essay. When it was unexpected that they called on you, it was dramatic for you, humiliating. You were isolating. There were no resources, and you're isolated with no resources. So what you do for yourself is you reparent. Let's say if you come up with a memory like that, just be aware. Do the happening. I hope this is making sense. Find that moment of trauma and speak to that part of you. Just speak to the part of you. I'm here for you. It doesn't have to be like that. And if it's really, really you need further help, then, call on someone. But you'd be surprised how what we used to just, the simple idea of inner child work, reparenting that part of you that was traumatized, who was told by siblings, good, or, you can go back and you as a parent, you as an adult can reparent that part of you. And I hope that makes sense for a tapper if you're doing tapping on yourself. Keep a journal and look for memories where you were isolated and had no resources and it was unexpected. Suddenly something happened, like I had the fire. 1 minute I was journaling and praying for a way forward, and the next minute there was a fire, and the trauma of that takes a long time to overcome, but anyway, so that's what I would suggest.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's a great practice to be aware. Simply the awareness is powerful in and of itself. Training yourself to be more aware of, where does this come from? What am I feeling right now? Even things like mindful eating, like someone who maybe mindlessly eats and eats a lot of food, just even the practice of going, wait, what am I feeling? Well, where's this coming from? And having that practice of awareness, keeping a journal, that in and of itself, journaling is its own form of therapy. And then, as you said, there's processes that you can do to really actually release the emotions, reparent the child that was isolated, the child within you that was isolated. And these are validated. I've heard from multiple therapists, highly trained therapists, very successful therapists who talk about the importance of this reparenting process. And so having the awareness of that and then tools to be able to go through and release that, which will usually involve working with a practitioner of some sort that can help you with this. And so on that note, if someone wants to find out more about you and about the work that you do, how can they find out more?
Right. You can find me at writethebookinsideyou.com. And I've also got a Facebook group, writethebookinsideyou.com. And I'm also under my name at Caryl with a Y, Westmore UK on Instagram and on social media. But my name is spelled with a Y, so it's Caryl Westmore, and it's UK because I'm based in the UK. So you can find me generally, but also at writethebookinsideyou.com.
Great. So writethebookinsideyou.com. We'll include a link, and that's Caryl, Caryl, Westmore, Westmore. So thank you so much, Caryl. And is any final words or tips or takeaways that you want to give for the listeners?
Well, I think what you said about having a coach is very important from time to time, not necessarily all the time. And I just want to honor you for the work I've done with you in the past month or two. It's really interesting when we share, and it's triggered my love of wanting to share with others what tools I have, and not being shy to explain the journey isn't always, from A to B. There are ups and downs. So that's what I'd like to share, and especially for writers and creatives. Sometimes, you set a deadline for yourself and things happen, but the book will come out when the book is meant to come out. And I think that's a wonderful thing to know. It might take a bit longer, but just get out that first draft.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Caryl.
Pleasure, Dirk. Thank you.